Do you find yourself swept away by the constant change and turmoil around you? Whether personal or professional, these challenges can keep us from living a life of peace and productivity. I'm Liz Hurl, a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist, and I want to show you data-driven strategies to help bring stability and peace to your life. Welcome to the Anchored in Chaos podcast. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, Liz. Thanks for having me back. We right back into it. Yes, we did. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm good. Yeah.
To catch everyone else up on what we're doing, we're talking about the struggle of accountability and responsibility in young adults today.
That's right. A huge topic. It's a huge topic. It's probably one of the biggest complaints that we hear about millennials and Gen X is that they're so hard to work with.
Right.
But we want to talk about kind of diving into this topic about accountability and responsibility. And for viewers that are watching, we just want to let you know that as Liz and I get better at this, we're learning how to kind of script our things out so we keep our notes fresh, that the information's flowing through.
Yep.
So you'll see us constantly looking down, but what we're doing is just, we've talked about this several times, so we want to have the hot points written down.
That would only be if you're watching us.
That's only if you're watching.
If we're just in your
Yes.
ears, you're right as rain.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What do you got?
So obviously, this isn't targeting any generation. This is this isn't targeting anyone. I don't want it to feel like we're looking at a generation
We're not
specifically. We're
beating up on
talking
anybody.
about,
That's right.
in general, where our viewpoint is on accountability and responsibility. And it does seem like nowadays we're having a struggle in identifying what that looks like and how to utilize that, how to take up those big pieces at work, at school, in our everyday life, in our relationships, and how to kind of hold ourselves into a position of knowing what accountability and responsibility is. This definitely goes into generations. What I mean by generations, because I said we weren't is looking at what we are created from. What did we see our parents do? What did we see our grandparents do? So when I talk about generational,
Right.
like how did a resiliency and perseverance look from their perspective?
Did we have any examples of what we're going to be talking about?
Right.
Hardworking.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because we have to learn how to maneuver and navigate within that, because their generation is different from the current generation.
Were they even exposed to any of these stories of the sacrifice, right? That had to go through it. Times where there wasn't much on the stove. You had to be pretty inventive. Resourceful, yeah.
Absolutely.
What we're kind of looking at here is, if we're going to cast blame, where do we target all that? Do we look at culture? Do we look at societal expectations? Maybe even, and most definitely, technology, right? Especially these phones that we carry that have become just a full-on addiction of just constant notifications and dinging and pinging, and surely they play a part.
Right. Well, versus casting blame versus understandable where it comes from.
Right.
Because this isn't, again, in the form of again, it's the understanding of, I wonder how this evolved into what it is today, in our understanding therein. So what is the effect of not having that, maybe those lessons, being taught what accountability and responsibility are from, I would say, a full healthy perspective, because there are people that said, well, I know I did teach accountability and responsibility. Sure enough, from their experience or perspective, that could very much so be the case. In broader spectrum of how does this cause a problem in our everyday lives when what one person's perspective of accountability differs from the other.
Right, sure.
Right. How we have to look at those, they have hard effects, right?
Absolutely. And you know, I want to look at how society has its put pressure on us. We've recognized that we think that young people are they're frequently just overwhelmed by what goes on in their lives. Not only are they having to deal with hormonal changes and growing up with maybe broken families or broken relationships inside, outside of school, but they constantly have to deal with the peer pressure of all that goes on around them and their friends, and not just peer pressures, but what their friends do and what's trending versus what you do, and being a bit ostracized by all that stuff, being left out.
Right. Nobody likes that feeling of
No.
feeling like they're not included.
Ghosted.
No. Fear of being left out is, what do they call it? YOLO, you only live once, or something like that.
Oh.
Anyhow, there is that mentality of feeling like, I don't want to be...
FOLO.
What is
Fear of
fear of
left
missing
out.
out, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know the
Yeah.
acronyms, but that is definitely something that people have. It's just not something I have. So
Yeah.
what we're not doing, and I see this in my practice and I see this in individuals and in my own personal life, is we're not really developing a space to sit in and reflect.
Right. We'll talk about that.
On ourselves. Like, it's constant, like you're talking about the dinging and the pinging and the next thing. It's like we're constantly in this motion of movement all the time. If we were to have the ability to sit and reflect within ourselves, I think that would really afford us some solitude. And if we have to consider what we're afraid of, well, then we're going to go into, I don't know if I'm going to be as good as, or I probably can't do this as well as. So self-doubt starts breeding, right? Like
self-doubt turns into this fear of failure, right?
Right.
The fear of failing. And by the way, this isn't unique to being young, right? This is anybody who's trying to do something new and be good at it, a sport, a profession. But what we're trying to do is give some guidance or tips or make people more aware of the simple fact that this fear of failing can be crippling. How can we assure people that taking responsibility and accountability absolutely are critical parts to accomplishing those things that need to be done? You can't succeed at what you're doing unless you take some responsibility and accountability for what you're doing. If you're going to be the boss, you're going to take it all.
Right. So one of the things I want to touch on there is that when we're talking about self-doubt, we have to understand what a hardship is. So when we go into what is difficult, what is challenging, and that's a little bit skewed nowadays of what is something I'm really enduring and I'm trying to manage and I'm trying to figure out the best way to resolve something. What do I have to own of this and what is somebody else's parts? And that critical way of separating a difficulty, such as we were talking earlier, a difficulty isn't the fact that there is your favorite coffee shop isn't open on time. Right.
Yeah.
It's like my whole day is ruined. I went to go in and they had to close down because the barista didn't come into work or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And now my whole day is ruined. And so I'm not going to be productive and this isn't going to happen. It's like, all right, so you might want to chill out there a little bit. Like, that is not a hardship.
Yeah, well, these minor things lead to major things. And the more fragile they are in their own mental awareness and stability. I didn't get my parking spot today. I'm here, but I didn't get my parking spot. I didn't get my coffee. I didn't get my Danish. They were out of my favorite, and this turns into the excuse mobile all day. Having a bad day? Well, they're going to hear about it too.
Right.
Your coworkers hear about it. Everybody's work. Okay, that's enough of that. What we need to do is start asking these questions. That how do we reverse this? How can I start to instill in people this idea that just because I don't know how to, let's say, I'm not going to own it. That way I don't feel, I'm not going to fail at it, right? Those are the things I want to look at. And those are the things that when people bring this up where they're doing kind of half-assed work or they're not doing very professional work or it's substandard, terminologies become popular. Soft quitting is they're giving mediocre work and expect high wages. We need to get people to understand that these things can't exist. We all have to do our level best at what we do. And you'll hear me say this again and again, even in this discussion, that you can be a boss without being the boss. Do the very best you can.
So how we're being impacted by this, I think when we're talking about the fear of failure, because it is massive, right? Like everyone has it. There's no one that's not going to be avoidant. Well, I mean, you could be avoidant, but the reality is we want to feel like we're thriving in some way and we're being successful.
Yes.
And however we perceive that we are not, that's going to really play a major role in our impact on our mental health and our ability to persevere and be resilient. One of the challenges around hardships I wanted to reflect on really briefly is that, and this may not be favorable for some people to hear, but I will be honest in where I would say our belief in trying to encourage one another kind of maybe have gotten skewed a little bit was when we went back or we created a participation award of when you're contributing to something and it's like, but you did try, so good job for participating. when the hard facts
Again, this
are...
is in the spirit of fairness.
Right, but
Right.
the hard facts are there are winners and there are people that have lost,
That's
which are
right.
losers. And
That's
I'm not
right.
saying that you're a loser, but if you weren't successful, then you have to reestablish and renegotiate and try again.
That's right.
So you weren't successful the first time. But I would say get into a mentality of that I feel like I did my best and look, here's my ribbon that shows I did my best. No, you didn't win. And that's really the hard facts. So I need you to kind of gain an awareness of like, okay, so next time I'm going to strategize and I'm going to do this. And this, we're looking sports related here a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Because I really want to make sure like that we win, that I'm successful at this, that I really tried hard at this.
Yeah.
Versus like, well, we all went out for ice cream. Everybody got a ribbon. And so they're status quo, right?
Yeah.
And being able to just know that, I think, is really important. How that can set us up for that lack of thriving and perseverance and resiliency. You have to know that you fail.
How to handle disappointment and defeat. We don't teach that enough. Here's the example, as we talked about participation awards. I've coached in the past. And in team coaching, you'll have parents say, why don't you put my son in here? He's the best. Okay, but we're a team. It's not team your boy, team my boy, team. And you'll find coaches' kids play a lot. And they get called on it too. You're the coach's kid. But the example I want to make for people who do participation ribbons, when a race is run, and we have a whole bunch of boys and girls doing separate races as they should, when you have somebody finish first and finish last, but everybody gets a ribbon, all the same ribbon, you do an injustice not only to the participants, but to the audience. In the participants, the person who got the first, who really did win, he doesn't get any special recognition because everybody won. The person who came in last and got a ribbon, he's now being falsely elevated to being a winner. You're not. And to the audience, you're now creating this two-tier, we're all the same thing. No, that's not life. That's not life. We are different, male, female, experienced, unexperienced. We are different.
Sure.
And you can say we're all the same, but when it comes down to doing the job, we're not the same. And that's an injustice, and we have to correct that.
Well, and this isn't, I'm not beating up the participation award idea because it's emotionally thinking. What we have come to understand is what it does to an individual when they feel that sense of failure. Like it goes into, I'm not good enough. I'm not really good at this, and teaching that, you tried really hard and that's really what matters.
Good job.
And that's what we have. Now you have to look at what you want to do differently next time. There is the validation of your effort. It did matter. You weren't successful, but your effort did matter.
Right.
And that's what children need, that reassurance of understanding their effort mattered. Versus what we have statistically known is that, there's this berating, you could have been more. You were so useless out there on the field. You could have done more. Well, that's not very healthy at all. So versus any child feeling like that, let's give them all our participation so they don't feel less than. And this isn't about, we have to suffer a little in our shortcomings to know how to move forward in a more successful way. So again, I don't sound redundant here, but if we're not persevering into a healthier understanding of what we have to own when we didn't do something right.
Yeah.
Like, I should have made that move and I didn't. So that's on me. That's my bad.
And next time when I see it, I recognize I've been here before and I change. Yes. Versus the insanity, I do the same thing over and over again and I expect different results. That's not going to happen.
Right.
And as I say this all the time, you've never met anybody in your entire life who's fallen to the top of the mountain. Unless you're Paris Hilton or Kardashian, who had famous fathers or hotels or whatever the heck, those people got to be famous, boom, almost overnight. However, they pay great sacrifice in strength and fortitude, and they pay a price that we probably can't comprehend. And I don't think that's but it's also, not only do I not think that's a worthwhile sacrifice, if you want to call it a sacrifice, I don't think that's even fair to expect people to believe you're not going to be the people who go on and play professional sports, NBA, Major League Soccer, all those, they're rare. They're super rare. In a celebrity world, you can be pretty famous just by putting something out. But your success will always be compared to somebody else. And in life, especially in education and growing up as in young people, you're going to learn far more from your failures than you ever win from your successes. Your failures will give you a resume of what not to do. Thomas Edison had 10,000 light bulbs until he found one. But in one of his famous quotes is, I found 10,000 ways not to do this. And in history, people will say, well, look, he invented the light bulb. Babe Ruth, famous for being a home run hitter. You know how many times he struck out?
Right. Well, and I mean, there's endless stories like that. I mean, there's Michael Jordan's for all the shots he missed. And I mean,
Scottie Pippen, everyone.
Right. You could go endlessly into that. And that's not even talking about other careers. But so society's view of success. Tell me, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
That's an important point. And society's idea that seems to be promoted from all levels is that we need to be independent. We need to be self-made. Nobody's self-made. But this fact that we have to be our own boss and our own home and our own business owner and all that stuff, that's great, but that promise is a very hard one to make. And to expect you to be able to do that is rare, because we know most people don't own their own businesses. And the people who have tried, they failed. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's very high that they fail within 5 years of starting, even fewer in 3 years. People just fold up shop, and it's because they come up against hard times, and either they're able to stop, evaluate, and regroup and begin to take some type of incremental steps or changes, or recognizing this doesn't work and this does. They may not understand that to do that work, you're poking the bear if you want to be the boss, because there's no 9 to 5. There's no 40-hour week. There's no vacations. Lots of times you're the last person to get paid, and it won't be full pay because you got to pay for everybody else. Now, if you're willing to take that on, know that it'll be a long, hard grind. But for that to happen, you have to understand that no one is going to come save you. Nobody is going to banks don't just knock on your door and see you're struggling in it. You're going to have to apply for that. And if you don't have a history, they're not going to risk that. If you reach out to your family, they may not believe in what you're doing. You may be all alone. Do you have the fortitude to do that?
Right.
Are you willing to pick up a second job to make money so that you can afford this goal? These are the questions you have to ask. And this is what these are the things we need to impart upon young people is there's nobody coming to save you. Look to the people who will support you and keep you responsible and accountable to doing the right things. Be sensible about it.
Right. And this all sounds really helpful and informative, what you're sharing. One of the things that I want to make note of is that if you're not taught any of this, I don't know what I'm doing.
If you've never seen it,
I don't know what you're talking about. So being open to that education process of grinding and grit and disappointment, and that would be another aspect of this, not internalizing all of your failures as I'm just not good at this versus this is just really difficult. And I've got to kind of give myself some grace and some understanding here that I'm learning a whole new aspect of something and I don't know what I'm doing. I shared this with you earlier, and that is when we're starting anything new, this was just obviously an infant idea 2.5 years ago, the podcast. And it was a neat idea, but then it's like formulating that, putting that into work. The substantial amount of failures I've had at this point is laughable.
But then I'm the same. Remember, we discussed this. Somebody had said, you should, and I'm going. But when we joined forces, we figured out, okay, now maybe there's more balance here, and we can support each other, maybe being more supportive on this, and I give you good criticism, and you give me good criticism, and we grow. You are on the right track here in the fact that it takes a lot of work.
Right. That's the thing. You can't be afraid of the setbacks, multiple setbacks that you will encounter, and just saying, well, the most important thing is that I believe in it. I have to keep doing that.
Absolutely.
And seeing what comes of it, because it isn't the recognition of what others may perceive it to be. It's I really want to be helpful as much as possible. And if I can give information in doing so, that's what I'll do. take it or leave it. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. But when things don't start stacking up in my favor, that's where I want to...
Are we crushed?
Right. Well, and that's where we're quick to start putting us into shifting blame of responsibility onto someone else. Like, and I have been burned in many ways. I mean, if I just utilized a podcast at its own in a website production and all types of different aspects, I could simply say, well, this wasn't successful because I was promised things that didn't work out. It wasn't my fault because these people didn't perform their duties. This is why this has suffered. No, I had to be like, all right, so now what I got to figure out another avenue here.
Yeah.
And
you did.
Right, absolutely. But we get into what I'm trying to share here is that we want to shift blame when things do not go according to our plan. Yeah. Again, that's lack of accountability and responsibility.
And in all truth, there's a few days of just wallowing in your own, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Are you kidding? Absolutely. There's plenty of times that I'm just like, why am I doing this? And being able to then, again, no one is to blame. I have to be able to see.
No, somebody is to blame.
Well, fair enough. But what I'm saying is...
But you're taking responsibility that I can fix this.
I can navigate it. I can figure it out. Like, I know this really sucks. I got screwed over. This is what's happened. But guess what? I'm going to figure it out. So when we're going into that, we have to be cautious not to go into this perfectionism mentality as well, being like, I've got to make sure this is pristine and this is perfect. And that's really hard because specifically in this kind of setting, we are really being vulnerable, being out with the public and sharing our education and our experiences. And you're like, well, did I sound okay? You know, and it's like, well, I'm just giving it to you real, and this is the way it goes.
That's the self-doubt thing. And this is a lesson I just learned from a dear guy who kind of got me back into training just, 10, 12 years ago, back into heavy working out because I had hip injury and it was really, really tough. But you pulled it out. And it happened to be that I shared many of the same aspirations. And we joined forces and we figured out, okay, we're going to get this done. Mm-hmm. But like I said, there were a couple of times like, ugh, man, I got gut punched too financially by thinking some people could, it's empty promises you were.
Provided services, they follow through.
They promised me some different things. And when you turn back, by the time you've paid out all this money, you realize, well, I'm doing this all by myself again. You're not doing anything. It's empty promises. So these things can really gut punch you. Now, can you get back up?
Well, yeah. And because what I'm talking about here is if we just shift blame onto the hardship of the people that let you down in an experience, then you'll kind of fall into that dynamic with every aspect. You'll go into it with any encounter that you have, like who is responsible for why this didn't work out, right? So there we're going to that pushing, deflecting responsibility onto someone else.
Yeah.
And we have a society that right now there's a lot of, I call them championing reels of like, you can do this, let go, don't let people affect you.
Yes. Easier said than done.
And it's all easier said than done. That puts unrealistic expectations on individuals. I shouldn't let it bother me. I don't have to let things affect me that much. I can just, I would say persevere, but can we just deflect off of our own responsibility?
Again, if you want me to just be disconnected, become a sociopath, I guess that works for your formula, but everybody has different arrangements. But mine is to address this societal thought that instant gratification is right around the corner. If I just do, let's say there's 10 steps and I check all 10 boxes and they all look good, does that assure me success? No, it doesn't. I've used the analogy, what's the difference between a formula and a recipe? Let's say I give you the formula to make chocolate chip cookies. Why don't they taste like grandma's cookies? It's the same thing because grandma has her own special way, and I would say it's love and passion that goes into it. That's the same thing in the instant gratification thing is you can do everything right and it doesn't turn out right. Now, do you have the fortitude to pick yourself up and try again? I used to listen to a man talk about, he was a metal worker and he forged a lot of stuff, and he was always talking about how much he marveled about Japanese swords. The finest swords ever made come from Japan. That the metal, if you don't understand, has been folded over 200 times. They've taken it, they flattened it out, and they fold it, and they fold it, and they fold it. Now, that is work that you cannot understand. And to put out an entire sword, a beautiful, beautiful sword, only to test it, and the sword breaks. Can you imagine what a master sword maker must feel? Oh my gosh, where did I go wrong? Anyway, back to the forge, right? And that's how he masters his skill. That's what it takes, is for people to understand that it takes hard work, and it requires you pounding at it all the time. What requires them too is, if you're a master or what you're trying to do as a professional, can you stop and reflect and go, here's where I made my mistake. You know what? I remember I didn't have exactly what I needed that day, so I substituted that. There's your mistake, right? Or in business, I was a little short on this, so I used this. Or my go-to guy wasn't here, so I used this. Or I outsourced something, and I usually do it myself.
Or maybe you don't even figure it out.
Or maybe you don't even figure it out.
Right. But it is, what I'm hearing there is the stop-start. We talked about that
You're
earlier.
right, stop-start.
The stop-start. The stop-start is incredibly exhausting, because we're stopping to maybe reflect, see where something isn't matching up, and
Self-evaluation.
Right. And maybe we find the resolve, maybe we don't, but then we start again.
Right.
And it might be starting completely over.
Right.
And that's what's exhausting. And so that perseverance, and which is really a need of understanding, everyone has that ability. You absolutely have the ability to be perseverant in really difficult times, even when you're like, I don't know what else there is to do, then move. But it is the understanding that, how do we do the stop-start over and over and over again, and not get the immediate gratification of success?
Abandon that, because that's a lie.
Right.
What I failed to mention is that society has been taught that I can build a house in half an hour on HGTV, right? All I have to do is find this passionate builder. No, there's months in planning, months in construction, the money, the evaluations, the permits. It doesn't happen in a half an hour. It doesn't happen. Stop thinking like that. We see that on cooking shows. We see that on all these things. It doesn't happen. Your crime shows.
I was going to say, I was talking to you about the crime shows. That
crime
it's like,
shows.
you can start a crime show, and then within 45 minutes, they've gotten all the forensics, all the blood, everything back, and all the DNA and everything. And it's like, that doesn't even.
And mine
comparably work.
Mine in science, I used to love CSI, the original CSI, and I would always marvel at when the crime happened. They don't give you any idea how much time passes, but it's almost like a lab guy's just waiting. When he read those blood samples, he gets that done. No, that takes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes never, and yet he can solve every crime. That's not how it works.
We do live in a quick abandoned society sometimes when things aren't going well.
Yeah, we do.
I do share, if you're doing a project or you're doing something, sometimes pausing and stepping back is really, really important to kind of regain clarity. What am I working on? Whether it be a communication, whether it be building something, it can work in any aspect.
Yourself,
right?
Self-improvement.
Being able to sit back,
right?
Take some stock, and then refocus, and then re-engage.
Right.
But when we fall into one of the things that we kind of glossed over here, but we didn't really touch on, is our emotions of how we're feeling. We fall into the sadness and the emptiness of the failure or of the disappointment, whatever it may be, and we reside there, and then we abandon whatever it is that we are working on, because this is just really too difficult, and I just don't think that it's really necessary. I can do something completely else and feel better. And
is that the plan B?
I mean, it could be, I suppose.
Is that the way where we abandon the thing and we go try something else?
Right, could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
Because we get into the idea that my emotions they have that much power over me, right? That I feel so emotionally fatigued in something, then I have the right to abandon it and move on and do something else. Well, that isn't really as successful to lead that kind of belief system in life, because I don't know where it is that somewhere along the road in, I would say maybe the last 20 years, that there is an understanding that life isn't difficult. Like, life is hard.
You didn't get that promise?
Full of hardships.
You didn't get the rose gardens?
All the time. It's suffering, it's challenges. And now we're trying to gloss over that with, if someone's being unkind to you, how do you talk to them? And how do you say, I don't really appreciate that. And someone can say, we're trying to maybe teach in society, I'm really sorry that was an experience you had with me. That wasn't my intention, because I wasn't trying to be unkind to you. And okay, fair enough. That's good. But if I can either accept that or hold you hostage to your emotions, but I mean by that is I can then say, well, I don't feel like they were really sorry enough, right? Like,
yes.
and so I'm holding myself in that state
Yeah.
and of, unfairness or whatever. And that leaves me stagnant to growth. Being able to take any responsibility of what the next steps of my life are.
Yeah.
Like, well, you don't understand. I've had a very hard life. I've had challenges.
Yeah.
I've had disappointments.
Yeah.
And I need to sit still for a while. Okay.
Yeah,
But what's your while?
Well, we know that movement is life. It's just in our pre-taping interview, we talked about in nature, mammals run other mammals off. I mean, when a mama has bears and they're big enough, she either just abandons them or she literally runs them off. She'll fight them. She'll scare them until they run away. And then they got to go live the world. Baby birds can't stay in the nest. The parents just leave. That's nature. We are more highly intelligent than that. But the truth is we can't just play the victim the whole time. And if we're going to get wrapped up in our victimology, we have to let people understand that life is hard, but you're going to get through it, and you need to educate yourself. We have phones sitting right here. We have the whole world at our fingertips. And rather than scratching at sliding cubes around, we could be watching a video on how a guy does something. You were talking about home repair. I talk about whenever I do some type of automotive repair that I've never seen before. There's a guy who's done it. He's filmed it. It's right in front of me. Are you doing that? Are we spending the time to expand our education?
Right. But if we're lost in that emotional disappointment, no. So we're wallowing in our setbacks.
You've lost your focus
And-
because you're swimming in your own.
And no one's
Self-doubt.
saying, get up, no one's coming, right?
Yes.
And I know the sound's a little rigid and a little direct, but the reality of it is like you have to learn to encounter these hardships and disappointments of others and not internalize them
Yeah.
as your failure, but as people being people sometimes. And one of the things I wrote down a note here, that my quick story of being able to pivot, redirect, and address something that's out of left field that I shared with you earlier, that some odd years ago, I won't say how many years, that I went in and I had done 2 phone interviews. And then they called me in for an interview. So I went into this room, and as I walked into this room, it was a panel interview, and that was not discussed with me. I was not prepared for a panel interview.
They're going to sit you down in front of a bunch of people.
I was on alongside of another table in front of 6 other people, and I was like, what, in my mind, I'm like, what is going on here? I was not prepared, and they were just like, oh yeah, this is a panel interview. And I'm just like, oh, okay, sounds good. And I totally winged it. But I was like, in that moment, if we want to talk about anxiety, it went through the roof. I was like,
and mind you, to pull back the curtain, that's one of your biggest fears.
Yeah,
right?
I don't like talking in a bunch of front of people. That's why it's really funny that I have a podcast. But anyhow, but I was just like, okay. So I just sat there and I was like, well, here we go. Fake it till you make it a little bit. And I got the position, and it went really okay, but it was a really uncomfortable experience. It was super uncomfortable.
That you got the position?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, here's,
I'm awesome.
I always give this a little story about self-improvement. I built fine furniture for about a decade. It was great. Worked with great guys, really talented guys. But I've never built furniture. I've been a good builder, but I've never built furniture. One day, I walk into a place in South Wichita, open these amazing doors, and I look in, there's all this beautiful stuff. I still don't know what's going on. It's like a museum. And then I look over and I look through the window, and I'm watching people work. And I see they're building furniture. I go, wow, that's really cool. So I watched, and I watched, and I watched, and I figured out who's in charge. It's this big guy. And this big guy's walking around the shop, and he's checking things, and he finally comes to the door, and I step out in front of him.
Put out your hand.
I put out my hand.
No one's watching.
I put out my hand. I shook his hand. I told him, my name is Tim Caldwell. I've been building my whole life. I don't know what you do, but if you show me, I'll do it just like you told me. And he hired me.
Sure.
Now, the reason he hired me is because flat out, I'm not bringing any baggage with me. I'm not going to bring, well, this is how I used to do it, and I'm not going to do it. I told him, you show me and I'll do it like that. He hired me because that's exactly what he did when he was a kid. And those things are lacking in the people who want to reach out and make communications. We were talking about people who said they're applying for jobs. And how many interviews have you, I've been unemployed for 6 months, but how many interviews have you done? None. How many applications have you sent out? 6. That's not good. You need to be sending out 6 a day. You need to be driving around in your car until you find a place that you think would work and go in and shake hands with somebody. That's how you're going to get a job.
Living in today's society, I'll push back on that. That is the fact that, yes, it used to be you walk in and shook hands. Now it is very technologically driven. You have to be able to work with technology and compute something into taking your resume and, yes, AI formulating it into something that will meet a job description of their algorithm, because it's all AI generated. But all of this is information that you can achieve and look into. It's like, if this isn't working, what will work? So there's the perseverance, there's that,
Absolutely.
critical thinking.
I'm not poo-pooing that, but my pushback on your pushback is this. This is paper and ink?
Yep.
And this will never convey you. And if you have the energy and you have this is your billboard. They can look you in the eye and tell if you are shining them, they'll know it. If they believe in you, or they get the impression that this is a good guy, let's hire him. They're going to hire you. Most of what I think we need to look at, in truth, the causes are, we don't have the mentorship we used to, right? We're looking at the fruits, maybe even into the next generation, of times got pretty good for us. Post-war, disease is under control. This whole, after World War II, this whole myth of living on credit, owning a home, working hard, going into debt, but just keep buy now, pay later. That all got us into this hamster wheel where we're kind of just moving through life only to pay bills, and then we die with nothing, or maybe even in debt. But when we get into education is still trying to say, you need to go to college, you need to do all these things, with all of the aspirations to go on and make more money. Well, okay, but I don't believe you need to go to college for that. If you want an education, go get a job. Go get a job doing what you want to do, and be patient. Pay your dues. And paying your dues requires hard work, doing jobs you don't particularly care for, and maybe working with people you don't care to work with. But those are part of the hard dues. And it's only through those experiences will you learn, well, I've seen this. I've seen when things go bad. I can handle it. I know what people I can depend on. Now, this isn't you as a boss, this is just you as an employee, but I know who I can ask when I'm having trouble too, in confidence. But we also have the simple fact that notifications, our time expenditure, we're not sleeping well, we're not exercising. 7 out of 10 people now in the United States are obese. 7 out of 10. And it keeps going up.
Sure.
Life expectancies drop. For the first time this year, as a side note, the first time our national population has risen did not come from birth. It came from immigration, meaning we didn't have enough babies to move the needle on our population. That's a nation that's really suffering. So how do we teach young people? You have to be in a room with people who are passionate about it. Go find further education. Let's say you graduate. Don't need to go to college. Go to a seminar. Go meet with people. Go ask somebody who's in charge of something, can I take you to lunch? Always broadening your education, right? And again, you have the entire world at your fingertips.
Sure.
And you can listen to whoever you want, but you should be broadening your horizons.
Well, the one thing I would definitely say is that you're responsible for yourself.
You are.
You are responsible for yourself, specifically in young adults. You are responsible for everything that happens, and that is a lot of pressure, and that is a lot of struggle therein, but it's packed full of opportunity and experiences and delight and joy. And if that is not considered for a young person, a young adult, this is what leads us into problematic pieces of all aspects of our life. It bleeds everywhere. It goes into your workplace, it goes into your relationships, your family. If I have the idea that my responsibilities of my actions, my statements, my behaviors are someone else's. You made me feel this way because of your actions. Therefore, you should be accounting for yourself. I shared this with you earlier, and this has become problematic, and something I see a lot and hear a lot about is if you have, now I want to be clear here, if you have 2 individuals that are trying to have a constructive conversation around a conflict or a disagreement, and someone is hearing emotional feedback and they don't care for what they're hearing and saying, this is what I experienced or this is what I heard you say. Now you're just trying to gaslight me into what you're wanting to believe.
Right.
So we have to be careful of this terminology nowadays because it's being misused when we're trying to have constructive criticism in our dialogue. It's now you're just trying to gaslight me into whatever it is that you think. No, I'm trying to give you my perspective. I'd like to hear from yours.
Sure.
And no, now you're trying to manipulate me. And so all of that is very cautionary.
As emotions go up, our logic and reasoning and understanding, maybe even cooperation, drops.
And so that further removes us from the accountability of our communication in ourself, of I can deflect that onto this other person, because what is happening there is you're igniting emotions in me that I'm not sure how to manage. And so that's emotional dysregulation. And so when that starts transpiring, I want to alleviate that as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So if I shift the blame to you and I put you in a place where you're like, well, wait, that's not what I'm saying. So then you're going to get lost in our transaction.
Yeah.
And as soon as I start dysregulating the whole system, I can get to an actual, in my mind, a calm state of saying like, okay, well, that was really uncomfortable. But you didn't address the meat of the issue.
Sure.
You didn't walk in the valley, right? And we're not also teaching that. We're deflecting quickly away from our emotions, our responsibility to them. So if someone says something, so when I'm talking about relationships, so an interaction happens and someone makes a comment to you that really bothered you, to be able to have the knowledge and the awareness of self to say, I just wanted to touch base, like the way you mentioned this kind of felt like it rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
And the other
person,
person
kind of calling him on that.
Right.
I'm going to make sure you didn't mean that personally, but you.
Well, first off, I'm
on.
taking it personal.
You're taking it personal.
I'm taking it personal.
Yeah.
And I just want to touch base with you on, because I don't want that to be a part of our dynamic.
Yeah.
And if it's like, oh, well, actually, I was being rude, so I shouldn't have said that.
Oh, yeah.
That would be someone owning their behavior,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Or, hey, I'm sorry you took it that way.
Yeah.
That wasn't my intention.
Yeah.
Versus if, hey, I don't know why you have to always act like that.
That's right.
Like you're always doing this. You're always trying to make me feel bad. You're insinuating what that transaction is versus like, let's kind of call it what's going on here. And then I get to decide if I want to engage with you further in my life.
That's a great segue to acknowledging what we need to be accountable for and responsible for. Right. Let's say in a scenario you're working, your boss comes over and kind of makes a comment that kind of ruffles your feathers a little bit. Like, you're good at your job. Everybody knows you're good at your job. Typically, he's pretty pleasant, but today he ruffles your feathers. Are you going to be responsible enough to come to your boss a little bit later and go, hey, you mentioned something to me earlier. I want to make sure that I got this right because I kind of took that wrong. But you said, am I hearing that correctly? You're holding him accountable and you're being accountable to yourself too.
Right.
You're saying to yourself, now, you're responsible for what you said.
Correct.
I want to make sure that I'm hearing it properly. So that's a tool, right? That's definitely a tool.
Well, that's a maturity tool, first off,
absolutely.
because you have to humble yourself to be, I call it the one down position. I have to be able to step down and say, okay, wait a minute, not internalize this, not personalize it to an emotional state of like, I'm so dysregulated versus like, yeah, it doesn't feel great. It's like, oh, that kind of feels uncomfortable.
Well, and the boss too, it's now in his court because you preemptively said to him, I took it this way. I'm making sure you meant that like that. And the boss needs to go, gosh, I didn't mean it to sound like that. I didn't get my coffee. I was late for work, whatever.
I'm really glad you said that because I want to jump in real
Absolutely.
quick. Because generally when we call people to the carpet on their, most importantly, their communication, their words, their actions, we go into a defensive mechanism.
The shifting blame
So
thing.
the shifting blame of like, well, that's not what I meant by that. And, what I was trying to say was this, and this. You know what? Fine. Still, don't pick that up as ownership. I want to caution people there. Leave it in their realm. Like, okay, well enough. I know that now. I'll go make sure to make these changes
Exactly,
or whatever it is. And then you walk away. I'm not going to own their dysregulation or disruption, whatever it is. And I'm going to leave that in the room with them and I'm walking out.
Absolutely.
But that isn't something that's taught. It's normally like,
it's not taught. And,
he's being such a,
and those,
jerk or whatever.
That is a tool. And that's a maturity thing. You're not just going in there and you're not blowing darts and throwing bombs. You left it in his lap, and now there's a strength that comes from that, is this fear that not everybody's going to like me.
There it is.
Right?
There it
and
is.
Let's say, I watch my boss. He talks to everybody pretty pleasantly, and he doesn't talk to me very pleasantly. You could ask him. I suppose you could ask him, especially if it's an ongoing thing. I notice you don't care for me too much. Is there a reason for that? It may be a complete misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. It could be that your boss is jealous of how good you are at doing your work. It could be that more employees like you more than like
Or they don't tell you.
Or they don't tell you.
Everyone's looking for the reasoning, and sometimes you don't get it.
That's right. And sometimes the boss just goes, whatever, and walk off.
Right.
You need to go, look, I'm done trying to hug this cactus. I'm going to do my thing, and you do your thing as best you can.
Right.
And if it comes up to something like that, I mean, we're going way down the rabbit hole, but that's what HR is for. Let's resolve this if this is something like that. But this is holding him accountable and responsible. You accountable and responsible. Nobody's looking out for you but you. And I tell this to people all the time. If you feel like you're being unjustly, you need to first bring it to the person who's doing it. If you don't get resolve, if you can't have amicable relationships there, you need to take it to the next level. But be brave about it. Be brave about it, because people will quit. I've always said, people quit leadership. They don't quit a company. They don't quit an organization. When leadership is bad, you lose people. That's the military. That's everything.
Well, that's
when you have bad leadership, you have a bad company.
Right.
And you want to be a part of something winning or something you believe in, express yourself, stand up for yourself. These are tools.
Right.
Yeah.
Most importantly. And, that fear of not being liked is kind of like the fear of missing out. It's really problematic when we get around people that for some reason or just other just don't care for our demeanor or our presence. And it's like, I don't even know what that guy's deal is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what's going on. And that's where self-doubt kind of starts breeding and doing its thing. And versus saying like, well, I'm not really sure what's going on with them, but I'm not going to try and it's a practice art. It
is.
I am not going to whatever your deal is, dude. I hope you figure it out. But I'm just going to kind of stay in my lane. That's a maturity too
especially if this
too.
person is a peer and is of no threat to you.
Even if they're either or, I would say even authority, as long as you're respectfully engaging and doing what you're supposed to be doing in your profession, or if we're looking at jobs specifically here. But if I know that, say you're out with a bunch of friends and there's this one person that just seems to be giving you all kinds of hard times. They just jab at you every time they can. They're like, what is this guy's deal?
Side-eyed and snide and cynical.
All these, just pecking on you, just annoying you. And it's just like, what is this guy's deal? Why doesn't, I don't know why he doesn't like me. Not everyone is going to like you.
Yeah.
And I will briefly share, because I shared with you earlier, my Sears story, that when I was 16 years old and I worked at Sears in the department store, and a woman was returning an item.
Worked in suits?
At this time, I was in juniors, but I worked in bins.
A career-shaping juniors at Sears. Yes.
Hey, I worked at Sears for a long time. Now that they're all closed, but anyway,
that's
really
old
kind
you
of
are.
dates me. Hey. Anyhow, this individual came in to return an item. Our policy, she was outside the policy. I couldn't do it.
No return.
I just informed her of the policy and said, I'm sorry. And I had never, in my young 16 years of my life, seen an individual respond the way she did, with yelling. And Loss Prevention called me and they're like, hey, is everything okay? And I'm like, I think so. This woman's really upset. I was so taken back from her behavior and her yelling and her screaming at me and calling me names. Eventually a manager did show up because she was just adamant that this was going to happen, and it didn't.
And the manager backed you.
100% backed me. They're like, no, this is our policy. This is not acceptable. And we moved on. But I remember I went into the dressing room because I felt like crying, and I did. And I called my mom on a landline because we didn't have cell phones.
That's how old you are. Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget, I told you this earlier, this was such a point of my life that I recall very close to my heart. She was just like, yeah, I know. You're going to find a lot of people like that in your life. There are going to be a lot of people that do this. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're supposed to be reassuring me. You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. You did everything right. I didn't get that. She's like, I know this doesn't feel great. And I'm sorry that it happened, but it's going to happen again. And I'm like, well, this is not good news.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I did nothing to provoke it, Mom.
Yeah.
That was my thought. I did nothing to provoke this kind of reaction. She's like, yeah, and it will happen again.
Yeah.
And it's happened many, many more times. And that was a great lesson in that moment.
Yep.
But she's like, get ready. it's going to happen again.
Absolutely.
And that was a very good lesson that I've actually
Absolutely.
taken with me into my adulthood of people are going to disappoint you. People are going to have poor behaviors, but this isn't on you. And she was very clear for that.
Yeah.
She's like, this, you did what you're supposed to do. And that's the way it is. And I couldn't understand. It wasn't about this woman not liking me, but how we can respond this way. And now we see in social media people recording each other's outlandish behaviors and responses of being belligerent and things of that nature as if it's entertainment, versus it should be really concerning that we think that this is appropriate ways to respond. So
And we know that that's not the appropriate way, especially to a young person. They don't understand that. They don't understand it at all.
Right.
But the idea is
you're teaching them to respond that
the
way.
idea
by
is
the
I'm
way.
slapping you down and you don't tell me what to do.
Right.
That kind of thing. My lesson comes from the military, and that is, there's an old saying, if you can make it in the military, you can survive in jail. Well, I lived in a berthing compartment that was 41 by 29, and 72 men slept in that thing.
Absolutely not.
And you are crammed in there,
Absolutely
tighter
not.
than a prison. But the camaraderie that goes on. If you got somebody you don't get along with, all right, I don't like you. You don't like me. Let's just agree, and you stay the hell away from them.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Now that's a man's perspective.
Right.
A woman's perspective, there's a bit more social stuff that goes on
there's
around.
a lot more emotional social pieces
about,
there.
About that. It's just not to be derogatory, but there's more emotional stuff that goes with that stuff and can get pretty catty. But
Easy.
But my point that I want to make about all of that is, you be you, I'll be me. we used to have, we do stuff all the time, building. Who can build a wall faster? Who can put up bricks faster? Who can do that? Well, you don't like me because I'm right-handed? I didn't make you left-handed.
Right.
I can't. Everybody's different. I'm not going to play in the NBA.
But we lean too much into that emotional feedback.
I know.
So one of the things that I really liked this earlier when we went over it, that it is a dangerous aspect.
It is dangerous.
If we do not teach accountability, especially to our younger generation, it weakens the fabric of our community.
It does.
And society thrives with people that we can rely on, that are successful, that are making appropriate actions and achievements and perseverance and all of those things.
And this isn't hyperbole or rhetoric.
Right.
This is truth. It really does weaken us. And the reason it weakens us is because if you're not accountable and responsible for your quality of work continues to drop and drop and drop and drop. And pretty soon we have planes falling out of the air and ships that sink and cars that explode. And you got to be held responsible. Now, those are huge examples. But let's say that in your relationship that goes into work, or how you problem solve at home, if you honestly are not living up to the fact that, well, she asked me to do stuff and I don't do it on time. Okay, whose fault is that? You don't have to remind me every 6 months to do something. That's a silly statement. Why didn't you do it the first time?
Because I'm
Why
tired.
didn't you do it the second time? Yeah, I'm tired. Now, let's work that out. Let's talk about, I know you're tired. I'm tired when I come home too. Let's figure it out. Let's alternate. Let's take turn, whatever. Those are skills, tools, but at some point, somebody's got to look in the mirror and go, I can only be responsible for you.
Without accountability, we have no progress.
That's right.
And that's real, true progress. And
That's right.
Understanding that we have to learn to understand we're responsible for our actions, our statements, our engagements. We are responsible for that.
That's right.
No matter what you feel provoked by, you are ultimately responsible for your response therein.
Yeah.
And it's not, well, you said this, therefore I responded this way because you made me feel a certain way.
We see it all the time. A lady says something to a lady in passing, and that lady hits her. Words isn't an attack.
But we're weaponizing.
But they
so.
weaponize words, and I felt attacked and I hit you. Okay, you escalated right off the bat. Words are just words. What value they are, you have to decide. But if you let everybody just push buttons, you're just going to be a punching bag your whole life.
Well, we're talking about mental resilience.
Sure.
here.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So, big question, Liz. What do we do about this? What tools can we do to help people navigate this? The reason I say we have to make a decision is because an indecision in a tough spot is a decision. Right? If something has to get done on time and you just procrastinate.
When people say I'm not going to make a decision, you've made a decision.
You've made a decision. That's right. And that decision, and the reason being is, I like when people say I don't do politics. Well, politics is moving all around you. You need to make a decision because it will at some point swallow you up. If you're not interested in politics, by golly, they're interested in you because you're paying into things. You're doing these things. I use politics only as an example because people don't like when I talk about politics. But the whole point behind making a decision means, am I going to drag people through needless suffering because I won't make the decision or make the sacrifice? Or am I going to make the decision and everybody else knows, I know this is going to be difficult, but we're going to suck it up, get it done, and go on.
Right.
Right.
So it's the ownership of self that we have to look at. Like, how do we own that? That's a really challenging place to be in. Like, when we have to know that my decisions I have to own. And I really want individuals to understand that creating yourself some consideration, grace, of knowing that you're going to have setbacks, that's going to happen. Like, versus thinking everything's going
assured, completely assured. Right,
completely have certainty and assurance that things are working out. You're winging it. That's life. Life is winging it.
There's no instruction manual.
No, absolutely not. And we have to have that awareness within ourselves. Like, I need to take a minute to be like, I got to take a beat. Like, this is some really crazy stuff going on. And I just need to kind of give myself some grace and check in and say, like, what is happening? And I need to kind of reassess, realign, and then refocus myself and go right back to it. So we do have to make sure we're doing that as well as checking it with others.
But Liz, we know, unless you're a hermit and really sequester your life.
Well, and some people do that.
And some people do that.
It's unfortunate.
But we know there's got to be somebody out there you can ask for help.
There's plenty.
And it doesn't, mental help, financial help, emotional help, just social help. Can you just help me? I want to learn how to talk to somebody. Can you help me? It's usually always going to be an elder, right? It's always going to be somebody older than you or more experienced than you. But the more important thing is you're asking for help. Do not be shy. 9 times out of 10, I would venture, is that if a young person comes to an old person and they sincerely go, I'm having trouble with this. And please use grown-up words. Don't grunt and show emojis. Would you just use some conversation and say, I'm trying to get something done?
That might be their generation.
I know, which is a problem. But you need to use your words, your grown-up words, and say, I need some help here. And in all likelihood, you'll have almost everybody try. Now, you have to decipher what's good and what's going to fit, what's not going to fit. What can you tolerate? What are you ready to accept? And then try to apply.
Correct. And I told you this earlier, that a lot of times so people are like, well, I have asked for help and no one's helping me. Then ask somebody else.
That's right.
Then keep asking, keep searching. Right. And when I ask for help, I'm looking for insight to resolve something that I've already put the framework to, by the way.
That's right.
I'm not asking for help for maybe from scratch. You should have an outline of what you're building.
Absolutely.
And say, hey, can you see, where I've got some holes here and help me fill in these holes. And knowing that if someone says no, then ask somebody else. And just continue to really advocate for yourself because it's important.
Something that just popped into my head too is about asking help. Offer help, right? If you've been in a position for a while and you see new people come on and you see them struggle, don't let them just struggle. Don't let them just flounder in their indecision, because that was you. Wouldn't you appreciate it if that's the inverse to that is offer help, right? Use your words. And so in the gym business, mine is, if you see people in the gym and they are struggling, or they're over there and they're high school kids and they're all rubber and magic and they want to see how much they can lift, great. But you might go, hey guys, can I show you something? Or how about I put you through, or whatever. I'm speaking from a coach. But even if you've been in the gym for a long time, and you might want to reach in, you guys got to be careful, you're going to hurt yourself. And you might get, go away, old man. You may hear that. I've heard it. But
go away, old man.
Oh yeah, and then I kill him. No, I'm kidding. But what happens is, at least you offered, and if they decide not to. But you know what? The proof is in the pudding.
That's right.
When you can go through it and people recognize you're good at what you do, then that's your part. This is part of the solve too. You got to help them too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And as we come to a close and we're wrapping up, I just think that the one thing that, we had some real direct talk today around accountability and responsibility.
We did.
And I want to make sure that there's an understanding of self-compassion. one thing that is important, if I'm not really shown what this looks like, it can sound really foreign. It sounds like that's a great idea, but I don't know where to start. And the starting point is always right there at the very beginning of saying, I don't know where to start. And asking for help is kind of evolving in that too. It's like you say, well, I have an idea of how I want to do something different, but I don't know exactly. And I may fall back onto traits of like, I don't know, so I don't do. Okay, well, no, I don't know, but I've got to figure out how to do, right? And understand that this process that you're always growing, you're always evolving, you should be anyhow, of what your abilities are. That's a great self-awareness piece of like, I can always just build on what I already have, but then what I don't know, I'm just building. I'm continuously building.
Sure.
But doing in a way of, don't be unreasonable. Don't put yourself in unrealistic expectations, which most people like to do.
Yeah.
Be a little kind to yourself. Know that you're growing, that you want to take responsibility. When things aren't going right, that is a really tough moment to be in, because then you're having to look at, I'm going to step up to the plate here, and this is going to be really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it, though, because this is the right thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do.
Yeah. You just had a little bit of an experience with your young one going to the dentist. Everyone's got to go to the dentist.
Right.
This isn't easy.
Right.
We all got to we got to do some things we don't like to do. But
yeah,
you know what?
I did. I told her. I said we have to do hard things, and this is a hard thing.
There's plenty of times in our life. We've talked about this. You say it frequently. Is that life is frequently struggle, and sometimes a lot of struggle and some hardship. But every so often there's sprinkled in this glimmer of, hey man, this is win, 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 and what a great day, what great weather. Are you recognizing the good? Can you see the flowers popping up out there in the gravel? The stuff in the sidewalks, is it pretty? Yeah, life isn't perfect. Business isn't perfect. Accountability and responsibility, it's not perfect.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's hard to teach. But you know what's interesting about all of this is that we're not alone. We're not meant to be alone.
Correct.
Find fellowship in the gym, find fellowship in the church. Go see your pastor, go see your rabbi, go see whoever you need to see, your mother, your father, whoever you're close to, especially people who have had experiences and they've told you stories about the war and the depression and man, you want to talk about hard times. It's not even relatable.
Sure.
But it's different. So find out people who can do that. And like everything we do, Liz, we just ask people to try your level best and be a good person.
To the best of your ability.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Any closing thoughts?
Just that for people to always be mindful of themselves and that you're a work in progress always, and that's actually exciting. It's not daunting that you get to look at yourself every day and see what else is new. One last thing that I would say that you mentioned there is that, yes, we've talked about life is very challenging, but we have such beautiful, blissful moments of peace and happiness that I think that we've tried to expand those, so we should always be blissful and happy. And the reality is we have moments of those, and then when we have them, we should really relish in them.
Absolutely.
Because the challenge is always there, and that's life.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's beautiful. I'm always going to tell people to take care of yourself. Treat people like you'd want to be treated. And as always, Liz, I always want people to stay tuned to our Anchored in Chaos podcast. We're learning and we still enjoy it and we're getting some things right. That's nice. And one day we'll make some money at this. But you guys like, share, comment, follow along. This is a learning experience for ourselves. Yeah.
Always.
Thanks, Liz.
Everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
This show is part of the ICT Podcast Network. For more information, visit ictpod.net.